There is in that also this play of the dissolving of limits, which is really, really continual thing in your work, all the way through from the very beginning, bashing your head up against limits and just dissolving through limits.
And you write about the strategies. With TG ended in 81, and it mainly ended for me. We were the first person to say, we've got to stop. And the others went, well, yeah. And it was because it had become too easy. There'd almost become a formula that was being iterated by industrial music as it spread. And of course that's not challenging. And when we made the first Psychic TV album, the first song we finished was Just Drifting. And that had an orchestra and was based on my interpretation of Frank Sinatra doing a ballad, believe it or not. And we cried with laughter in the studio, thinking, the TG fans are going to hate this. That's great. We have to start thinking again. And times change, the punk thing, the industrial thing, all those different actions were because of the way that the world was at the time. England was falling apart with a 3-day week, and Thatcher and Reagan and all that mess. But then, if you are fortunate enough to get people's attention, there comes a point where you have to reconsider how to communicate. And that demands respect of the people you're speaking to. You get a responsibility. And it's no longer just the yelling and shouting, and suddenly you have a duty to try to be as honest as you can to the people that are listening, and to try to keep explaining what you're perceiving and why you're seeing it that way, and why things are dissolving the way they are in terms of what you think of reality. And so PTV has always been an ongoing, amorphic vehicle for us to have a dialogue with society at any given time.
And so there is less of a sense in PTV of being overtly challenging, revolutionary on a broad scale. So you look back at Throbbing Gristle and you say, this was a revolutionary sound, this really changed stuff. You look at the idea of cutting your body, challenging the boundaries that exist between two people. There's a violence in both of these things that is an element of shock, and it looks like a deliberate attempt to challenge, to break through, do that stuff. That is not as overt when you listen to PTV.
And it's not meant to be. And when you watch the film, hopefully you see, as you did see, you see love. And it's funny, the last thing that we were obviously friends with Burroughs and Geisen for a long time. It was Burroughs that set me on that course in a way when he said, how do you short-circuit control? And he was a man who was actually privately very tormented by his personal life, that he'd abandoned his own son, Billy Jr., who eventually died about 40 years old after a liver transplant, who'd been a speed freak, and tried to emulate his father in order to get his attention. And Uncle Bill, as we used to call him, Burroughs, shot his own wife, Joan, in the head in this tragedy in Mexico. And we were speaking to him a lot at that time on the phone. He was in Naropa in Colorado. And he was crying when he realized that Billy had died, because he'd never been forgiven, and he'd never asked for forgiveness. But then, after he died, James Grauholtz, his partner and friend, came to New York and rang me up to go and see him. And he told me about William dying, and then he showed me William's diary. And the very last entry said, I have just realized, it might not be exactly word perfect, but I've just realized that all there is to life is love. And the pen actually trails off like that as if he died when he said it. And I started to cry, and I said, thank God he found that out before he died. It was that close.
It's the most precious bit of knowledge I have in my life, for Sure.
And it's something when we decided to be a creator of art and music, literature, whatever, we thought we will never sacrifice those we love to making art. Those we love should always come first, no matter what. And that was a really strong and important difference in a way, in our approach.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So, we've got a few minutes. But if you want to have a clap, something very nice about the applause. Putting two hands together, making that sound to each other. But there's a man here who's had his hand up. Would you like to say something?
Not wanting to build up the past, I'm just wondering what's going to happen to your archive.
Oh, well, it's already gone, actually. This is one of the great ironies of life. As some people here will know, in 1992, the British government raided my house in Brighton and took away 2 tons of the archives, all the films, all the videos, every photograph. Sometimes the only copies of movies by Derek Jarman and myself, of William and Brian, and destroyed everything. They never charged me even with a parking ticket, but we weren't allowed back in Britain for 7 years. Why? They hated the artworks we were making and what they were saying. But here's the great irony. The year before last, Tate Britain purchased the remaining archive. And last summer, they actually exhibited, and it said in the programme, elements of the archives of Genesis Breyer Orridge, one of the modern masters of British art. But even more ridiculous was that when the whole explosion of scandal happened in 1976 with the prostitution show, and they kept freaking out because I had made these silly sculptures with used tampons. And to explain how silly, for example, one was an Art Deco clock filled with used tampons, and it was called It's That Time of the Month. Kind of schoolboy humour, right? But they called me a wrecker of civilization for that.
It's pretty close to carry-on, really, isn't it?
And yeah, exactly, it's British vaudeville. But when they bought the archive, the Tate Britain actually got in touch and they said, we do get the tampons, don't we? And I said, of course you do.
So, is there any more questions?
This might be a complex question, because I've got rather a personal interest in particularly your recent work, because I did some gender experiments myself with a similar goal in a way, and yet kind of opposite. In 2000, I took estrogen for 9 months as a magical process, and took estrogen for 9 months in 2000 as a deliberate magical process, and at the end of it, married myself. So it was kind of like 1 becoming 2, whereas it's like you were like more like 2 becoming 1. Although for me it was like 1 becoming 2 becoming 1 again. So it kind of came back around to being the same thing in a way. But what I'm curious about is how much when you started the project you were thinking about hermaphroditism, because it's like my intention with taking the estrogen seemed different because other people I knew who'd taken it were like trying to change genders, whereas I wanted to become as much a woman as I could without becoming any less a man. And it seemed like a whole different process that was challenging to other transgendered people. And so I'm kind of curious whether you and Lady J started out with an intention of both becoming hermaphroditic, something in between each other, or whether you were becoming each other as in you were becoming female and her becoming male, and how much of that process was involved?
Well, first of all, it seems like your emphasis is very much about the physical and the biological.
Well, no,
whereas,
that was just a result of earlier experiments, but yeah.
Well, just the way that you phrased it.
Yeah,
it's not meant to be a criticism,
yeah.
It's meant to be a way of splitting the answer.
Yeah.
For us, we always thought that we wanted to merge to become literally one being, which is why we always knew it had to be after physical death. So our entire intention has always been, for us personally, to reconvene after physical death and then actually surrender to each other and become literally one consciousness, wherever and however that might be. Having said that, yes, of course, being the people we are, we wanted to have more of everything. And so our feeling was, why have only a vagina or a penis? Surely it's better to have both. And so if we could have, and we did ask doctors about this, is there a way to construct in some form both genitals? And they said, not yet, which was a shame. But in the end, it doesn't really matter to us because what we're doing is most important in the way that we symbolize an idea. We did do an estrogen and testosterone experiment together. Jay taking testosterone and me taking estrogen. And my God, I realized what a terrible time women get sometimes. I kept crying. I was a bitch. Jay said to me, and she said, oh, for God's sake, stop taking those pills. I can't stand it. Meanwhile, she was kind of, whoa, shut up. It was really bad news. So we now have a much deeper empathy for the hormonal tricks of nature.